Okay, this is my second video on Seminole War publications, and there will be more than one. I cannot cover it all in just one video or one or two videos. I'm going to have several on the subject. Now, the stack of books that I'm going to show right now, they're on the floor and they're the stack as high as my knees. So that's just a few that I'm going to show to let you know. So when you see me reaching down, it means I'm reaching down to pick a book up or put it down. Anyway, there's been a lot of books written on the Second Seminole War, but most of them in the last 30 or 40 years. Uh, Before that, before the 1970s, there was really not much available, almost nothing available. But anyway, I forgot one book to mention last time on the First Seminole War. This is it, and I went without the virtual background this time because the gloss from the books will mess up the camera and throw it off. This in the Facsimile series, Narrative of a Voyage to the Spanish Main. Now that's a strange title, but it's all on the First Seminole War, and it has the transcript of the Arbuthnot and Ambrister trial, the two British citizens that Jackson had tried and hanged at Fort St. Mark's. Actually had Arbuthnot hanged probably on the yard arm of his ship, and Ambrister he had shot. There, Ambrister was a military officer, so he was shot. Arbuthnot was hanged because he was a civilian, about 70 years old. But this has the actual transcript word for word of the trial they went through, and it's very informative of the history of the war. Although I kind of wonder if a lot of the evidence in the trial was fabricated. So, that's always been an interesting question. But on the Second Seminole War, the first book on the subject, it came out right after the war ended. It was by John T. Sprague. Sprague was the adjutant in the war under Colonel Worth, William Jenkins Worth, married Worth's daughter, in fact. She's buried in St. Augustine at the military cemetery with Worth's wife. After Colonel Worth died in 1849, he was buried in Brooklyn, New York, and his wife and daughter moved in with Sprague. Um, and Sprague had the commanding officer's quarters at St. Augustine because after the Civil War, he was the army officer in charge of Reconstruction. So very important. But this was his book for a long time, written in 1848. Includes a lot of letters and dispatches about the war. Very informative. Has a list of name by name of the casualties of the war and how they died. One of the most valuable parts of it. And it's been reprinted in recent years by the Seminole Wars Foundation. And I have a link in the description of the books that you can get on sale nowadays, and this is one of them. You can get it through the Seminole Wars Foundation. I recommend that you buy this one because it is a facsimile of the 1964 um, facsimile publication. The original book did not have an index, the facsimile does, so this one does. So you can see John T. Sprague's The Florida War on sale on Amazon or a lot of places on the web. That's because the publication date has expired. It's in the free domain, but that copy is a copy of the original. It does not include the index and the introduction, which is actually very valuable. In 1858, there was a congressman named Joshua Giddings, and he published a book on the Seminole War called The Exiles of Florida. This is actually on the Black Seminoles. And this one is good, maybe just for historical value on the war. It has a lot of errors and mistakes. Giddings had never visited Florida. He was not in the war. So, and he never came to Florida, never visited. So he goes on a lot of newspaper articles, hearsay, plus he has a reason to write what he does. For example, there's one part where he mentions something about dates, Mann, and I go back to the source that he quotes, and that information is not put in the source. So yeah, I don't consider it a very good book. It's also, besides having a lot of things that are inaccurate, but a lot of people swear by it. They just don't do their research and know it. In 1898, uh, there was a book written on the Seminoles by Charles Coe. It was in the Facsimile series, and then it's been reprinted. It's available now through the Seminole Wars Foundation, and it's very good because he's interviewing people who had not that far a connection to the Seminole War, although he's researching what he can get a hold of at the time. Not too far off of that is something I found. You could maybe find this in some antique stores. It's very common because it was a tourist brochure. It's written by a man, George Brown. He was a ordnance sergeant who was a caretaker at the fort at St. Augustine, constantly on land in the Florida War Record. He's actually reprints Sprague's casualty list, and he reprints a lot of different antecedents from the Seminole War. So for that, it's kind of interesting. It has a lot of little reminiscence of the Seminole War. This book came out, I believe, in 1953 by the University of Oklahoma Press, or 1954. This is a reprint from 1985. Edwin McReynolds, The Seminoles. And I didn't see this on the bookstore, but you can probably get it through the Oklahoma Historical Society. It's been printed enough times, it's easy to get a hold of. Real good on Seminole history, and then it goes from Florida and switches over to Oklahoma, what is going on in there. And then is what we call the landmark book of the Seminole War, the first modern book printed about 1969 by John Mann from the University of Florida. And this is just an old hardback copy I have. And this is available through the Seminole Wars Foundation. It's really considered the first big complete book on the Second Seminole War that was published in 120 years. And it's very good. It's still good by today's standard. That was a lot of good research he did on index cards before the internet was available. And going into the post-internet arrival, we have books on the Seminole War, and there's a lot of ones, and I'll include some more in the next video I'm going on. This is a short one, easy to go through. Florida Seminole War, 1817 to 1858 by Dr. Joe Knish by Arcadia Press, or the Making of America series. And so you can get this one pretty much in any bookstore. The Seminole Wars Foundation will also sell this one. And Dr. Joe got together with John and Mary Lou Missel. John and Mary Lou basically are most responsible for this. Is actually what came out of the dissertation that Mary Lou did for the Seminole War. It originally came out in 2003. The Seminole War is America's largest conflict. It's very common, easy to find, but I wouldn't get that one. I would get the one that it just came out in 2020, and this is the modern version, The Seminole Struggle, A History of America's Longest Indian War. And this one is a revised version of the previous book, so I would go ahead and get this one if you want to get the book. Very good. It follows along what the political atmosphere is going through at the time, the characters that are connected. So it really connects a lot of things in the Seminole War. And I've published a book. It's Seminole and Creek Wars, Battles and Events. It's a timeline of the war, and this is my latest publication by Ingram Spark. I've actually been through about four or five different versions printing this. I originally started it as a pamphlet back around 2000, That's really before the internet was common, and I'd go to a copy store and run them off on the copy machine before real vanity printings were around. And finally, I made a bound version in 2013, and I decided the print was too small. And I had a few more things to add and revise. So Seminole Creek War events revised. But then I had a lot of problem with the printers. I'm not going back to them. So I went to a new printer, Ingram Spark. I'm very happy with them. And so this is hopefully the final version, the Seminole Creek War battles and events. I have a link in the description. Now, if you don't want to spend a lot of money for books, there's actually a free book printed by the Florida Department of State Division of Historical Resources, the Seminole Wars Heritage Trail. You can get this free, and I have the link down the description. It's places to visit in Florida. Let me turn to the map. That's the map of the state, and you see all those little tiny yellow dots. Those are places, sites to visit, museums, historical sites, even list some historical markers. And I just saw that on sale in some of the third-hand booksellers, even for as much as $15. And that's ridiculous to have to pay for it because you can still get it for free. And little side note, during the Second Seminole War, what we call the Second Creek War went on, and this is an excellent book by John Ellisor, The Second Creek War, Interethnic Conflict and Collusion on the Collapsing Frontier. That's a big title, and it's 500 pages. It's a really extensive book, but it's probably the biggest and best book on the Second Creek War, and includes all the different phases from Alabama to Georgia and to Florida. An excellent book. Beforehand, if you want to know about the Second Creek War, you'd have to go around scattered genealogical sources. And then I want to include just briefly books on the Third Seminole War. In 1982, James Covington wrote the Billy Bowlegs War, and I don't have a dust cover because I think this is actually a used library book. And this was very good for a long time, 30, almost 40 years. This was the only book we had on the Third Seminole War. And it's pretty amazing at the time because he wrote this book in only about 2 months. So there was a lot of things missing. And then just recently, Joe Knish, John and Mary Lou Missel collaborated and got the Third Seminole War book out. And this is by, I think it's Casement Press. Yeah, Casement Publishers, who publish military books. And this is the best book on the Third Seminole War, even though there's not many, but it's just full of information and really expanded what we knew, including a lot of the militia, state militia information that we didn't know at the time. So those are the books I have in the Seminole War. I have my Florida Panther mug, says Wakulla Springs. That created an interesting discussion when I bought it, because there's people that claim that Florida Panthers are everywhere in the state. So I said, why is a Florida Panther on a mug for Wakulla Springs? And they said, oh, some people claim they've seen them here. So who knows? I mean, one was captured near Columbus, Georgia a few years ago. So anyway, that's books on the Third Seminole War, and I have to do another video on books on the Second Seminole War, but because there's other few ones worth mentioning, but these were the main ones. And so stick around, and then I have a video I want to do on books on the Black Seminoles. Some people call them the Maroons. Then I want to do about books on eyewitness accounts of the Seminole War, books that were written by the people that were there, like M.M. Cohen, George McCall, Henry Prince, all the eyewitness account books, and that'll be fun. And I want to do another video on books on particular battles and forts on the Seminole War. So that's going to be interesting too. So there's a lot of material to go by. And as I said, a lot's been written in the last few years. So I hope you have a good afternoon or good evening and enjoy.